Sera Ashveil had small hands. That was the first thing people noticed about her, and usually the last. Small hands for a healer, they said, as if the size of a woman's palms determined the steadiness of her work. She had been healing wolves since she was 16, setting bones, drawing fever from sick pups, pressing herbs into wounds that the pack warriors were too proud to admit hurt. 12 years of that. 12 years of being useful, in a way that nobody thought to put a name to. She was 28 when the fate bond ceremony changed everything. The ceremony was held in the great hall of the Voss palace, under a ceiling painted gold and black, under chandeliers that held 200 candles each. The pack elders conducted the ritual at dawn because old magic liked the dark bleeding into light. Every eligible wolf in the palace stood in a wide ring, while the bond smoke moved through the room, pale and slow, looking for what it was looking for. It found Sera. The smoke curled around her wrists like a bracelet, and drifted toward the throne where King Caelum Voss sat, straight-backed and expressionless, watching it come. He was 32. He had ruled for 6 years. He had the particular stillness of a man who had learned very young that showing feeling was the same as showing weakness. The smoke connected them. The room went quiet. Not the quiet of awe, the quiet of a crowd that does not know how to react, and chooses silence while it figures it out. Caelum looked at Sera for what felt like a long time, but was probably 4 seconds. She looked back. She did not look away first. She did not look afraid. She simply looked at him, the way she looked at a wound, directly, without drama, trying to understand what she was dealing with. He called his chief advisor to his side and spoke in a voice low enough that only the front row heard. The advisor nodded. The advisor walked to Sera and delivered the message with the particular careful politeness that powerful people use when they are doing something they know is wrong. The king appreciated the ceremony's result. The king had reviewed the matter and made a decision. The king was currently in negotiations with the Gold March Pack for a political alliance, the terms of which included a marriage to Princess Lyria. The king wished Sera well and had arranged a very generous financial settlement for her trouble. Sera listened to all of this without moving. When the advisor finished, she said, "No thank you," quietly, and walked out of the great hall. Her hands were at her sides. They were completely still. Nobody followed her. Nobody said her name. She packed one bag. She left before the morning meal was served. The road out of the Voss kingdom ran east, through 3 days of farmland before it hit the border markers. Old stone posts carved with the king's seal that every wolf knew meant, "Past this point, we don't protect you." Beyond the markers was a stretch of unclaimed land called the Ashlands, rogue packs, old forest, territory that no king had ever managed to absorb because the wolves who lived there had decided a long time ago that they would rather be difficult than be governed. Sera crossed the border markers without stopping. The first rogue pack she encountered nearly killed her. Nearly. She had set the broken leg of their pack leader's youngest daughter before they could decide whether she was a threat. The daughter's name was Mira. She was 7 years old and screamed through the whole procedure, and then fell asleep holding Sera's hand. They let Sera stay one night. She stayed for 3 weeks. When she left, the pack leader pressed a hand to his chest in the old gesture, the one that meant, "You have a place here if you need one." She did not know yet how badly she would need it. She kept moving. Over the next year, she moved through the Ashlands like water finding its level. Pack to pack, wound to wound, fever to fever. She did not ask for anything. She did not explain herself. She worked, and she listened, and she learned, and the Ashlands slowly stopped treating her like a stranger. There was a night, about 8 months in, when the old healer of the Krath rogue pack sat across a fire from her and looked at her hands for a long time without speaking. "You know what you are," the old healer finally said. It was not a question. "I'm a healer," Sera said. Before that, Sera looked into the fire. The ceremony said Omega. The ceremony read what was on the surface. The old healer reached into a worn leather satchel and pulled out a book so old its cover had gone soft as cloth. Sovereign Omega. Different bloodline. Older. Your kind could form and sever pack bonds at will, not by force, not by dominance, by genuine choice. The new kingdoms classified you as plain Omega and buried the distinction, because sovereign Omegas made the hierarchy complicated. Sera took the book. She read it by firelight for the rest of the night. What followed was not a dramatic awakening. It was quiet and strange, and sometimes painful, like learning you had been walking with a stone in your shoe for 28 years, and the relief of removing it was mixed with the odd grief of realizing you had walked that way so long, you had thought it was normal. She could feel the bonds between wolves, the invisible threads of loyalty and belonging that held packs together. She had always felt them, she realized. She had just never had a word for the sensation. Now she could do something with it. She could strengthen bonds that were fraying. She could offer her own bond as a foundation, genuine, unforced, and the wolves who took it did so freely, knowing they could also refuse. The rogues, she discovered, were desperate for exactly this. They were wolves who had left their packs or been pushed out, some for valid reasons, some for reasons that said more about the packs than the wolves. They had survived on their own, which they were good at, but surviving alone is not the same as living, and most of them had been surviving for years. When Sera offered a bond that required nothing from them except their own willing choice, they took it with something that looked, on the faces of very tough wolves, who did not like to show feeling, remarkably like relief. Her territory grew, not by war, by accumulation of trust, which in the Ashlands was worth more than any army. She built a hall. The wolves helped, because they wanted to, because it was theirs too. Rough stone from the Ashland quarry, timber from the eastern forest, a roof that kept the rain out and a hearth that kept the cold out, and a table long enough to seat 60. She made decisions at that table with her council, former rogues, former outcasts, one old scholar who had been run out of the Voss capital for writing books nobody wanted written. The decisions were good ones, because she listened before she spoke, and she had learned more about governing from 12 years of healing than Caelum Voss had learned from 6 years of ruling. Because healing teaches you that what a person tells you is wrong is almost never the whole story. Meanwhile, in the Voss palace, the gold and black ceiling watched a king become less than he had been. Elam had married Lyria of the Gold March pack 3 weeks after the ceremony. She was brilliant and composed, and brought with her exactly the political alliance he had calculated for. The marriage was, by every rational measure, a success. He told himself this frequently. His wolf disagreed. An alpha's wolf is not a separate creature, but it is also not entirely the same thing as the man. It is the part of him connected to the old animal truth of what wolves are: pack animals, bond animals, creatures for whom belonging is not a preference but a biological fact. Caelum's wolf knew the fate bond had been refused, not declined, refused, and it began to register this, the way a body registers a wound that was never treated, slowly, then worse. He lost sleep, his temper shortened, his dominance, the steady, reliable force that an alpha king projects, and a pack draws stability from, began to fluctuate in ways his advisors noticed, but did not know how to name to his face. Border reports started arriving that mentioned the Ashlands queen. At first he dismissed them. Then a trade merchant came in with a complaint about new terms set at the Ashlands border crossing, terms that were reasonable and firm and not going away. Then a military probe his general sent without asking him first came back with 3 scouts and a report. The report used the word queen 14 times. Caelum read it twice. He set it on his desk. He did not pick it up again for 2 days. When he picked it up again, he read it a 3rd time, and then he sat very still for a while. He sent an envoy. The envoy came back with Sera's terms for a border meeting. The terms were simple and thorough, and included a clause that the meeting would be held on Ashland's territory, because she had no reason to come to him. He accepted her terms. She made him wait 6 hours at the border. Not out of cruelty. She was in a council meeting, and the council meeting took as long as it took. His guards stood in the cold, and tried not to look like they were standing in the cold. He stood with them rather than sitting in his tent, which was not a political calculation, but the only honest thing he had done in a while. When they brought him into the hall, his first thought, before he could stop it, was that she had built something real. Not impressive in the way palaces are impressive, which is to say, not built to intimidate, built to last, to hold people, to work. There was firewood stacked along one wall with the careful precision of someone who knew what winters in the Ashlands cost. There was a healer's station in the far corner, clean and fully stocked. There were 60 wolves in the room whose body language said that they were exactly where they chose to be. And there was Sera. She had not changed in 2 years, and she had completely changed in 2 years. The difference was not in how she looked, it was in the way she occupied space. She sat at the head of the long table, and the room organized itself around her, the way rooms organize themselves around gravity. Naturally, without force, simply because that is how it works. She looked at him. He had the strange experience of being seen by someone who had no reason to see him kindly, and was choosing, for their own reasons, to see him clearly instead. "King Voss," she said, "sit down." He sat down. The meeting took 2 hours. She was a better negotiator than he was. He had known this was possible from the reports, but knowing something from a report and experiencing it across a table are very different. She was precise. She had thought further ahead than he had on every single point. When he tried to push on the border crossing terms, she listed, without raising her voice, exactly 3 reasons why his position was weaker than he thought it was. She was correct about all 3. He agreed to her terms. She walked him to the border herself when it was over. They walked without his guards. She had requested this, and he had agreed, because refusing would have been small, and he was trying very hard not to be small in front of her. The Ashlands forest was quiet around them. Late afternoon light came through the trees in long, pale lines. He said, without planning to say it, "I made the wrong calculation." She did not say anything for a moment. The forest was quiet. A bird called somewhere in the high branches and went quiet again. "I know," she said. "I'm not—" He stopped, started again. "I'm not asking for anything. I want you to know that. I'm not here asking." "I know that too," she said. They reached the border markers. She stopped. He stopped. She looked at him with the same direct, undramatic gaze she had used in the Great Hall 2 years ago, the first day and the worst day, and there was no anger in it. There was no forgiveness either. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. There was simply the clear-eyed recognition of one ruler looking at another and making a judgment about who they were. "Your kingdom is on my border," she said. "A destabilized kingdom on my border creates problems I don't need, so I will consider what a longer-term arrangement might look like. Not for you, for the territory." He nodded once. "Go home, King Voss," she said, and turned back into her forest. Lyria left the Voss kingdom 4 months later. She did it with grace and without malice. She was practical, and the practicality was mutual. The separation was documented and witnessed and fair. Nobody was the villain. The marriage had simply been a calculation, and the variables had changed. Caelum Voss steadied in the months after the border agreement went into effect. The proximity of the fate bond, even at distance, even unclaimed, was enough to slow the deterioration. He slept better. His dominance leveled out. His pack breathed easier, which they expressed in the particular wolf way of simply being calmer, which was worth more to him than he had realized it would be. 2 of his vassal packs sent petitions directly to the Ashlands that winter. Trade matters, dispute resolutions. They sent copies to him as a courtesy. He filed them without comment. The agreement between the Voss kingdom and the Ashland sovereignty was signed in the spring. Equal parties, equal terms, witnessed by representatives of both courts. At the signing, his advisors sat across the table from her council. His advisors were older, better dressed, more decorated. Her counsel was a former rogue enforcer, a 7-year-old girl's father, a scholar who had been run out of the capital for writing honest books, and an old healer who kept a very old book in a worn leather satchel. Her counsel did not defer to his advisors. His advisors, after about 20 minutes, deferred to hers. Caelum watched Sera sign her name at the bottom of the document. Her handwriting was clear and unhurried. When she was done, she set the pen down and looked up, and found him watching, and for one moment, the room was very still. Then she turned to her counsel and said something that made the old scholar laugh, and the meeting continued. Outside, the Ashlands spring was coming in, green and unhurried, the way strong things grow. Somewhere in the eastern forest a pack of wolves was running, their bond threads bright and willing and entirely chosen, answering to a queen who had not been given her crown by anyone. She had built it, from the ground, with her small, steady hands.